Welcome to the closing event of the COP29 Virtual Ocean Pavilion. My name is Katie Mitchell. I'm a research assistant with the Global Ocean Forum, and along with Plymouth Marine Laboratory, we are the co-organizers for the COP29 Virtual Ocean Pavilion this year. I am grateful to all of our attendees for joining us for this high-level panel discussion today. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to be here. And with that, I will turn it over to Professor David Freestone, who will be our moderator for today's event.
Yes, morning, afternoon to everybody. Thank you for, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm a little bit croaky, but I'll try my best. So we have a wonderful panel. Thank you very much to everybody for joining. We're going to address an issue which is probably one of the most important law of the sea developments this year, but it also has major significance for the climate agenda as well, which is the BBNJ Agreement, the new agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. I think it's a model agreement in many ways. It took us 2 decades to get there, but it's got fantastic flexibility provisions in it. I think it envisages a whole range of mechanisms which will allow parties and if they use it in the way it's envisaged, to respond to the changes which we're likely to see taking place in marine ecosystems as a result of climate change. So I think it's a great model for us to end the series of events which the Global Ocean Forum has been convening during this 2-week conference. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, and we are on a fairly tight schedule. So I'm going to move straight in to invite our first speaker to say a few words for us. It's Ambassador Gina Nguyen from Costa Rica, who's the Director General of Foreign Policy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she's going to talk about overcoming the challenges of the BBNJ Agreement ratification. Over to you then, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Professor. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful for the organizers to have thought of Costa Rica to be part of the discussion, and so very happy that we are discussing ratification after the adoption, after so many years, as you said, of negotiations, and which I was lucky enough to be part of 15 of those 20 years. So I felt the pain and felt also the excitement when we crossed the line, but we still face challenges, and not just developing countries, also developed countries, maybe even more developed countries, to finish the country or the domestic requirements for ratification. For my country, for example, ratification goes through Congress. I think that happens with many other countries, and that is usually a challenge. I think it was a little less of a challenge because we have been involved with ocean issues for over 15 years and putting these as one of the main items of our foreign policy. So they hear us talking so much about the ocean that congressmen who are invited to our ministry to explain what we are doing with the Blue Agenda, they kind of knew what was happening, even though there's been several different congresses through all the process, but we try to keep our parliamentarians informed of what we're doing, and I think that helps. So our first challenge was with the draft bill, and I think here the support of civil society for and countries one to the other is really, really important, because unless you have been really involved with the negotiations, maybe it's difficult for you to draft the bill. So in Costa Rica, we're very lucky because we had a great team of women ocean champions from the government, those who were involved in the negotiation, but also from NGOs who worked together preparing this this first draft of the bill. And something that was very important for us is that we had the stakeholders' involvement in the negotiation process. So fishermen who at first were very against it, once they realized what was happening and that it was going to be adopted, we got them involved. We took them to the UN with us, and we explained to them, the scope and how this was going to help them more than harm them. So it was really incredible, the transformation, because they were against it, because there were some organizations pushing them to oppose, international organizations pushing them to oppose the treaty. But in the end, when we took them to the UN and showed them what was happening and showed them also the benefits, when the treaty was adopted, they congratulated us. They published a congratulation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for having been able to push this. So that part helped us, because once we presented the bill to the Parliament, there were no march, or there were nobody opposing, which sometimes happens with environmental bills. So we make sure the parliamentarians understood the benefits of the BBNJ agreement, and the Congress received our bill. It was already analyzed in the Specialized International Relations Committee. We also met with the congressmen and explained it to them, and we got 2 or 3 to be like the ones head sparing the process, and we already got a positive recommendation, which is crucial. Then it was taken to the plenary. We met with the heads of all the political parties. We have many political parties in Costa Rica. And so we explained all of them, the relevance, and we got a positive vote already. So it had the first approval. Now it is under constitutional consultation, where we don't expect any problems, except the workload, which might delay the court ruling. But once it gets the okay from the Constitutional Court, it will go back to the plenary in the Congress. Our challenge here is a happy time, Christmas, because parliamentarians get big vacations, so they will probably get to it after Christmas vacation. But after this is approved, it will go to the president for him to sign, and we think we might be having this ready by the end of January. But I want to say that we are not waiting for ratification or for the entry into force to start working. We are already working with our friends from civil society to prepare an area management tool proposal to be ready for the first COP. You probably heard of our wonderful Costa Rica Dome, which is a remarkable oceanographic feature in the Eastern Tropical Pacific Ocean. It is characterized by a persistent dome-shaped upwelling of cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface, and this occurs and it brings a lot of biodiversity here. So the phenomenon really supports an abundant variety of marine life, and that is why this is very it has big interest to marine biologists and ecologists, and plays a significant role in understanding climate change and its impact on oceanic and atmospheric patterns. Because it is interlinked to the Niño phenomenon. So we are already preparing for the BBNJ implementation for the first COP to have this ready with the help of civil society. We think also that is very important, and even though I was supposed to speak only of our own challenges, I think developing countries share similar challenges, and I think developed countries and civil society can help prepare bills, support national campaigns in those countries where there's resistance towards BBNJ, I also think it's very important to start with capacity building, which is one of the 4 elements of the treaty, before the treaty enters into force. You don't need to have it into force to start with capacity building so that developing countries are ready for the implementation of BBNJ. And I believe that is something that we need to start right now. It is very technical, and we need to start right now. Lastly, I think, and I want to finish with this, our efforts to save the ocean must be interconnected as the ecosystems we strive to protect. We have the coming Montreal Global Framework, Target 3. We have the World Trade Organization efforts to eliminate fisheries subsidies that Costa Rica ratified last week. We have the BBNJ Agreement, the Paris Agreement, and we have also the efforts we're doing to stop deep sea mining until we have enough scientific information, which is happening in the Seabed Authority. And for us, they all serve as critical pillars in our collective ambition to safeguard marine life. And the challenges are not isolated, and neither are the solutions. So to truly make a difference, Costa Rica believes we need to integrate all these frameworks. That is why it's so great that we're talking about BBNJ in the middle of the climate negotiations. And Costa Rica offers its support for other countries on our experience with BBNJ. But we also want to invite everyone to participate at the highest level possible in the United Nations Third Ocean Conference that is going to take place in Nice, France, next year in June, where Costa Rica and France are co-hosts, because what we try to do is precisely to take concrete actions. We hope BBNJ will be ratified and enter into force by then. But we invite you to go there and to really work together so that we can commit to the protection of the ocean with an integrated approach. And I thank you so much for inviting me once again.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. And that's a good stirring start for us, I think. And we look forward to seeing Costa Rica's ratification. It's great to hear. You also mentioned the Thermal Dome project, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because it's linked to the project which I'm administering, which is the Sargasso Sea. They're both supported by the French Global Environment Facility. So thank you very much indeed. We'll move now to our next speaker is Jeremy Alderflugel, who's the third secretary at the Permanent Mission for Monaco to the United Nations. And of course, Monaco is already ratified, so it's one of a model for us in moving forward with this. He's going to talk to us about overcoming the challenges of BBNJ Agreement ratification. Over to you, Jeremy. Welcome.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor, for giving me the floor, and thank you, Ambassador, for sharing Costa Rica's experience regarding the BBNJ Agreement, and for mentioning the third United Nations Conference on SDG 14. I would like also to take this opportunity to indicate that Monaco will have the pleasure to host in advance of UNOC 3 the Blue Economy and Finance Forum in June 2025, and we hope this event will help maintaining the attention on harnessing and financing sustainable ocean-based economy, which is also an important topic related to the protection of the oceans. Before I start sharing with you the Principality of Monaco experience of ratifying BBNJ, I would like to thank the Global Ocean Forum and the Plymouth Marine Laboratory for organizing this event, and the COP29 Virtual Ocean Pavilion for hosting it and providing us with a useful platform to underline that the BBNJ Agreement ratification and implementation is a necessity. So I'm going to try to share with you the main elements that led the Principality of Monaco to sign and then ratify the BBNJ Agreement on the 9th of May 2024, making Monaco the 5th state to ratify the treaty and the first state to do so on the European continent. I think the first element is definitely Monaco's constant commitment in favor of the environmental protection in all its aspects, and especially the ocean. So indeed, environmental protection is at the core of our national and international policy, according to the political guidelines set out by our sovereign prince, the Prince Albert II of Monaco. This includes the fight against climate change under the Paris Agreement, the protection of biodiversity under the coming Montreal Agreement, and of course the protection of the ocean under the United Nations Convention of the Law on the Law of the Sea. And this leads to the implementation of very concrete projects, especially with regard to the ocean protection, at national and international levels. Just to give a few examples, I would mention the Ramoge and the Pelagos agreements signed with France and Italy, which aims to tackle marine pollution and to protect marine biodiversity in the Mediterranean Sea. Another element is also the strong awareness of the Monegasque society on environmental issues, and particularly on ocean protection. In an area of just 2 square kilometers, the Principality of Monaco is home to a multitude of players and actors involved in protecting the environment, and particularly the ocean. This includes scientific centers such as the Monaco Scientific Center, which is developing research activities on coral reefs, pulse, and biomedicine, but also civil society through, for example, the work of the Prince Albert II of Monaco's Foundation, which it develops initiatives such as the Med Fund, an environmental trust fund based in Monaco and dedicated specifically to financing to the financing of marine protected areas in the Mediterranean. So from these two elements, there is a clear consensus. A clear consensus has emerged on the vital necessity of protecting the oceans and marine biodiversity, especially in the context of the BBNJ Agreement negotiation. So when the negotiation of the BBNJ Agreement began, it was therefore quite logical that Monaco had to join this negotiation almost 20 years ago. So there was a strong political will to participate actively and to become actively involved in these issues that are important to us. On some parts of the agreement, by example, devoted to area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, but also on more cross-cutting aspects of the agreement. So we were therefore involved at all stages of the negotiation on these issues during the preliminary work on the scope and parameters of the agreement, then during the preparatory commission, and of course during the various sessions of the Intergovernmental Conference. So once the negotiation have been concluded, this constant monitoring, our active participation, and as well as our political will and national awareness of the need to protect the seas and the oceans have resulted in the signing by our sovereign prince of the treaty on the very first day it was opened for signature on the 20th September 2023, and then quite logically, the ratification in the months followed. So to conclude, we hope that the international community and other countries will sign and ratify this agreement in order to quickly reach 60 ratification and thus enabling the agreement to enter into force and to be fully implemented shortly. And we are also counting on the first conference of parties in this regard. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jeremy, thank you very much. And yes, we pay tribute to Monaco for being one of the first to ratify, but also for great general support. I know your ambassador Isabel Pico has been a tremendous supporter of our project and lots of others, and so Monaco has been a tremendous supporter of this whole initiative. So tremendous. Thank you for your comments. So our next speaker, I'll move straight on. Our next speaker is Raphael Goulet, who's the head of the Unit for International Ocean Governance and Law of the Sea and Arctic Policy and the Directorate General for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries in the European Commission. And he's going to talk about provision of technical, legal, scientific and logistical support for the ratification and early implementation of the BBNJ Agreement. And of course, the EU comes with a large number of parties. So we're looking forward very much to ratification by the EU as well. So over to you, Raphael.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to address how the BBNJ Agreement can contribute to climate resilience. On this Nature, Biodiversity and Ocean Day at COP29, I'm very pleased to see that the ocean community is committed to advance the ocean climate nexus within the UNFCCC. And indeed, climate change hits hard and with no exception. So it is really essential to ensure the integrity of all ecosystems, including the ocean, and to protect its biodiversity. This was confirmed in the COP28 decision on the global stocktake exactly a year ago. And for this, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including the 30 by 30 objective and the BBNJ Agreement, are indeed key milestones. More specifically, the BBNJ Agreement has confirmed, and I quote, the need to address in a coherent and cooperative manner biological diversity loss and degradation of ecosystems of the ocean due in particular to climate change impacts on marine ecosystems. And I see here a very positive interaction between BBNJ and UNFCCC. BBNJ will help mitigate climate change, and mitigating climate change will benefit the ocean and the ecosystem services it provides. So the carbon absorption capacity of the ocean can be strengthened if there is an efficient implementation of the BBNJ Agreement. So, as already mentioned by previous speakers and surely by the next ones, we need a swift entry into force of the BBNJ Agreement. The European Union has completed its ratification process, so we are ready to deposit the ratification instrument before the 3rd UN Ocean Conference in June 2025, together with most EU member states. So the only reason why we haven't officially ratified now is because we wanted to do as much as possible en groupe with our member states. So we are calling, in any case, on others to ratify the agreement as soon as possible so that it can quickly enter into force. And we heard very much what Ambassador Gina said, and we have recently adopted a funding decision for an EU Global Ocean Programme of 40 million euros over 6 years, notably to help our partners implementing the agreement. So now let's look maybe at the provisions of very briefly of the BBNJ Agreement. We expect the provisions on area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, and on environmental impact assessments to effectively address the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions on the ocean. Article 17 on area-based management tools acknowledges the role of these tools in both protecting the marine biological diversity and strengthening resilience to stresses, including climate change. And one of the indicative criteria for identification of areas in future proposals is vulnerability, including to climate change and ocean acidification. Marine protected areas will not stop climate change alone, that is clear, but they will contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation by removing stresses and pressures, thus creating areas of rich use for biodiversity, including marine living resources. A comprehensive network of well-managed marine protected areas are key measures to protect and restore marine and coastal ecosystems with their habitats and species. Such as a network is really essential to restore, maintain and strengthen ecosystem resilience to climate change and ocean acidification. So it is urgent to protect our planet's biodiversity hotspots, including the unique marine ecosystems of the Southern Ocean. With its member states, the European Union has proposed at the CAMLAR to designate 2 new marine protected areas, and we deeply regret that there is still no progress on this front. Now, let's look at the EIA provisions. Conducting an environmental impact assessment will require to conduct an analysis of the potential impacts of the planned activity on the marine environment. And by including the cumulative impacts, and by cumulative impacts, the BBNJ agreement includes the consequences of climate change, ocean acidification, and related impacts. So future planned activities in the high seas would need to be in line with the Paris Agreement. There are also provisions under the EIA chapter to ensure synergies with other relevant legal instruments and frameworks. And this is an important, it is important because when it comes to address the impacts of climate change, we need to do it in a coherent manner. Before concluding, I would like to say that the EU welcomes the ITLOS advisory opinion on climate change. The opinion found, among other things, that anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere constitute pollution of the marine environment under UNCLOS. ITLOS also found that the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment enshrined in UNCLOS can be invoked to combat any form of degradation of the marine environment, including climate change impacts such as ocean warming and sea level rise. So to conclude, let me just say that we need to achieve climate neutrality by 2050 to combat the deleterious effects caused by climate change impacts on the marine environment. Let's keep ambition on the ocean in view of UNOC 3 and the next UNFCCC Ocean and Climate Dialogue. At the Dialogue special event last week, we were pleased to hear from many parties and non-party stakeholders their wish for high attention of ocean and climate topics for future sessions. So we see a window of opportunity to encourage for greater integration of ocean issues within the different existing policy frameworks. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rahel. Yeah, very done, tremendous stuff, and lovely that you were able to flag the ITLOS judgment. I think I'm actually a member of the Committee of Legal Experts of COSIS, and we were obviously delighted with the judgment, and it went, as far as we had possibly hoped. And of course, it now represents a separate legal obligation from those which we're talking about for the last 2 weeks under the UNFCCC. So thank you so much. So I'll move on then, if I may, because we're still doing quite well for time. Thank you to all our speakers so far. Our next speaker is from DOALOS. It's Valentina Germani, who's with the UN Division for Ocean Affairs and All of the Sea, which is, of course, currently serving as the interim secretariat, and she's going to talk about the role of DOALOS in supporting early entry into force of the BBNJ agreement. Over to you, Valentina.
Thank you, David, and my apologies as my slides seem to not have started from the beginning, but bear with me, everyone. A good morning to everyone, and a big thanks to the Global Ocean Forum for inviting the division today to speak about the role of DOALOS as interim secretariat of the BBNJ agreement and its activity to promote a better understanding of the agreement and to prepare for its entry into force. So as of today, we have 104 states and the European Union who have signed the BBNJ agreement, and 14 of those signatories have also ratified it. In terms of the DOALOS mandate, it is set out in the agreement itself and relevant General Assembly resolutions. Article 50 of the agreement provides that until such time as the Secretariat to be established once the agreement enters into force, and that a Secretariat commences its function, the Secretary General of the United Nations through DOALOS shall perform the Secretariat functions. And just to recall, the agreement will enter into force 120 days after the date of deposit of the 60th instrument of ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession. In terms of the DOALOS mandate, we were mandated under General Assembly Resolution 77321 to perform the Secretariat functions under the agreement, to promote a better understanding of the agreement, and to prepare for the entry into force of the agreement. More recently, in General Assembly Resolution 78272, the General Assembly decided to establish a preparatory commission to prepare for the entry into force of the agreement and for the convening of the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I'll refer to it as COP. It also requested the Secretary General, always through DOALOS in cooperation with other departments of the Secretariat, to assist the Commission in the performance of its work, including Secretariat services and the provision of essential background information and relevant documents. So here we are now on the right slide, and apologies for that again. And just to sum up, the role of the DOALOS in relation to the agreement is twofold. First of all, the DOALOS serves as the interim secretariat of the agreement, and this includes servicing the meetings of the BBNJ Preparatory Commission and, in general, assisting the Commission with the performance of its work. Secondly, DOALOS' role includes the implementation of the program of activities developed in response to the request by the General Assembly in Resolution 77-321. Just quickly in relation to the Preparatory Commission, for those who are not familiar with it, its establishment by the General Assembly was a significant step forward towards the agreement's entry into force and the initial implementation. The Commission will be open to all states members of the UN, members of specialized agencies, and parties to UNCLOS. It will also be open to observers. It should prepare a final report for presentation to the first COP, and it will cease to exist at the conclusion of the first meeting of the COP. More recently, on 13 August 2024, the General Assembly adopted a decision which requested the Secretary General to make proposals to strengthen the capacity of DOALOS to continue to provide the preparatory commissions with the assistance necessary to the performance of its work, including any intersessional work that may be convened by the co-chairs. We are currently supporting, in fact, the co-chairs in developing the program of work for the Commission and in identifying, in cooperation with the Bureau, the required documentation for the first and second substantive sessions, which will be held next year. On that basis, DOALOS will prepare the required background and working document. The division's program of activities also includes capacity needs and priority assessments in relation to the agreement, as well as regional workshops, technical assistance at the national level, briefings and side events, and the development of capacity building tools and outreach materials. In addition to the activities supported through the regular UN budget, DOALOS is also receiving support from the European Union to implement a number of activities over the next 2 years. In terms of current or recently completed activities, we are in the process of developing a needs assessment toolkit to enable states and those supporting them to undertake such assessments. We hope for the toolkit to be completed by the end of this year. Secondly, we have held 4 regional workshops for the Pacific region, the Northeast and Southeast Asia, for the Caribbean, and for Latin American countries. A 5th workshop will be held in Morocco for states of the Atlantic and Mediterranean coasts of Africa next month in December. We completed a series of online briefings on the agreement, and the recordings of those briefings are available in English, French, and Spanish on the agreement website. Finally, as part of its program of activities, DOALOS has also developed a series of fact sheets on the agreement, which are now available on the website of the agreement. And lastly, DOALOS and UNEP jointly developed an online introductory course on the BBNJ Agreement, which is accessible through the UN information portal on multilateral environmental agreements. It's known as Informia. And I thank you. I hope you got a quick but good overview of the division's work. And of course, we stand ready to support all of you in the entry into force and early implementation of the agreement. Thank you.
Valentina, thank you very much indeed, and congratulations. I mean, this is a huge work program, rather similar actually to the work program of the Preparatory Commission. I'm sure we may have some questions about that as we come forward. So thank you so much for that. And our last speaker in this section is another Gina Maria Torri from the International Center for Dialogue and Peace Building. She's going to talk about providing an informal platform for advancing the ratification and implementation of the BBNJ Agreement. So, Gina, over to you.
Well, thanks so much. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to join you all here today. looking at the BBNJ agreement in relation to climate change. As the organizers have pointed out, the BBNJ agreement can strengthen climate resilience by advancing marine conservation, sustainable use of ocean biodiversity, and more, especially given that the ocean and areas beyond national jurisdiction cover almost half of our planet. The ocean and areas beyond national jurisdiction is not only one of the great remaining commons of our planet, but it's critical to sustaining life on Earth. And so the BBNJ informal dialogues were created in 2020 as a track 1.5 process with the support of the governments of Monaco, Belgium, and Costa Rica. And so it's great to see Jeremy and Ambassador Garillo here today. Since then, we've had the governments of the United Kingdom, France, pardon me, Germany, Canada, and Sweden, along with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the High Seas Alliance all come on board to support this incredibly important global initiative. And so you might be asking yourself, what is a Track 1.5 anyway? And a Track 1.5 dialogue is designed in this context as an informal convening space for member state representatives, along with select experts from UN agencies, international, regional, and sectoral organizations and bodies, and civil society to make progress on the BBNJ agreement and process. And you may ask, why is this informal process useful or even necessary? And part of the challenge we face in international peace and treaty processes is sustaining and advancing the work that needs to get done in the interim in between official meetings. Often work that needs to go on consistently and on a regular basis in between official meetings is simply impossible due to lack of funding, human resources, and coordination. And so what inevitably happens is that a lot of time gets taken up at official meetings, just kind of warming up. And precious time in these important official meetings gets lost. And the work that has gone on informally in the BBNJ informal dialogues has helped delegates to kind of hit the ground running when they get to formal meetings. This kind of informal work provides an opportunity not just to maintain momentum within the treaty process and ratification phase, but for states that may not be fully engaged in the BBNJ process yet to come into this informal space and to get up to speed. And I think it's crucial to note that the BBNJ agreement is not just important for coastal states, but for all states, including landlocked states. And as many of you are aware, there is an enormous amount of turnover when you are working in government ministries. These informal dialogues have provided an opportunity for those new to the portfolio to come into the process and also get up to speed. And for those who've been in the process for years, or for some of you even decades, it's provided a regular informal space for exploring and evolving different parts of the package, the BBNJ agreement. These dialogues have been crucial in providing a space for delegates to think about what needs to get done next and to advance the process. And we've seen them take some of this discussion out of the dialogue and effectively advance the process. There is a lot that has to go on, including a lot of paperwork. As you can imagine, there's an enormous amount of work that needs to get done in advance of the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement and before the first meeting of the Conference of Parties. In the lead up to the April 2025 meeting of the BBNJ Preparatory Commission, the dialogues have been focusing on the clearinghouse mechanism and the subsidiary bodies of the Conference of Parties, in particular, the Capacity Building and Transfer of Marine Technology Committee, the Implementation and Compliance Committee, the Scientific and Technical Body, and the Access and Benefits Sharing Committee. This is a lot of work. It will be important for the BBNJ agreement to work across conventions. And so in these dialogues, we've also invited relevant legal instruments and frameworks and relevant global, regional, and sub-regional and sectoral bodies, which we like to call in shorthand IFBs, to share information on institutional arrangements and lessons learned. We will also be focusing in advance of the April PrepCom meeting on exploring issues related to the Finance Committee on Financial Resources and on financial resources and mechanism. And all of this just scratches the surface of the depth of work that needs to be done to effectively advance this treaty for our global commons. And so this kind of regular informal work, be it a treaty process or a peace process, is absolutely necessary alongside of formal processes to ensure that it doesn't take decades to advance the BBNJ agreement process. As you all here know, we don't have that kind of time. And so I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Okay, Gina, thank you very much indeed. Yes. So I think one of the distinctive features of the 2 decades of negotiation is, in fact, the key role that civil society, scientific communities and civil society actually played in assisting with this process. And I'm delighted that it's being so well organized for the future. So thank you very much. Very helpful. Right. So we've now got technically, I think we're doing pretty well, I think, I have to say, having 5 minutes or so. Katie, do you want to help me? Do you think we should have 5 minutes? Are there any questions? I didn't see any questions in the chat. Do you want to?
Absolutely. And I'll direct all of our participants to the question and answer box. It's viewable at the bottom of your screens. You're able to type any questions into that Q&A box, and then our panelists will be able to answer them. So we've had only one question so far that has already been answered. So please, for all of our attendees, head to that chat box.
While we're waiting, perhaps I could also just ask Valentina a question. I mean, just so that if I may, just quickly, well, it's not maybe, well, it's a quick question to ask, but the COP1 has large numbers of items were deferred to the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties by the agreement itself. So it's going to have a very full agenda. I know that this is a matter of some concern. Things that the PrepCom are dealing with are enormous, the list of issues they have to deal with. Do you think there's going to be time? Ambassador Gina from Costa Rica was suggesting that they hope that they might be able to put a proposal forward for an ABMT in the first meeting. Do you think there's going to be time at the first meeting for this?
To me?
That was really for Valentina, if I may.
Thank you, David. But Ambassador Gina, you're always very welcome.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's
come
even better.
and support. But maybe, David, let me just say that, of course, there's an enormous amount of work that will be have to be done by the first Conference of the Parties. And as I very quickly mentioned, currently the Secretariat is supporting the 2 co-chairs, and I should mention that these are Ms. Janine Felsen of Belize and Mr. Adam McCartney of Australia. They were elected, in fact, as the co-chairs of the Commission. And so we are working with them and the Bureau as well, which is made up of 50 members, to work on the provisional program of work for the Commission. And of course, that will be based on the cluster of issues that were extensively discussed during previous meetings, and on the understanding that matters to be addressed by the COP at its first meeting will have to be fleshed out and organized. So I don't really have a magic ball to answer your answer specifically, but indeed what I can say is that there are a lot of work behind the scenes right now before the first session of the Commission to make sure that there is a program of work that meets all the requirements under the agreement. As you know, the several articles of the agreements have set out what will need to be decided at the first Conference of the Parties, including decision on the permanent secretariat for the agreement.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it was an impossible question. All right, so but you answered extremely well. Thank you. So we have got a couple of questions in, also really difficult, actually. The first one is, how can we implement effectively the cumulative impacts provisions of the BBNJ, and should it be done regionally? I can have a shot at that, but is there anybody else would like to say something about that? Lisa, is that something you'd be willing to say something about? Without putting you on the spot, say no if you...
Yeah, I'll let you go ahead and take that one.
Well, I'll have a go at that, and then perhaps Valentina can answer as well, or others. I mean, it's quite a difficult question. I mean, I think this is a role which the COP is going to have to assume, right? This, given one of the open questions is really the relationship between the COP and the scientific and technical body, which we hope will be a dynamic one. But the main issue, the main area where this is going to come up, of course, is going to be in relation to environmental impact assessment. And it's all good practice anyway for environmental impact assessments to look at cumulative impacts. So that's going to be, a major part of the of this work program. I think there's also a possibility that the COP will actually look at proposals. We could take this into account when it's considering proposals for ABMTs, right? In the sense that we just look at, well, is there a case for protecting a particular area for one reason, or is it because of accumulation of other reasons? Any other thoughts on that? I mean, so he or she asks anonymously, is regionally? Well, I think there's a place for some regional considerations of this, just as in the way that we're looking at the possibility of networks of protected areas, which will have to be done in collaboration at a regional level initially, but also globally. I think there's also, the case where this is a concern at a regional level. Okay, if no other jumpers in on that, then let's go on to the next one. What are the main obstacles for implementing BBNJ? That's a big one. I don't want us to run out of time. Does anybody want to have a shot at that one? Volunteers?
Well, maybe if I could,
Please, Gina.
Freestone, I think one of the main challenges is going to be maintaining momentum and consistently working towards the implementation of the agreement. So I think it's important that work from lots of different organizations and entities be going on consistently. And that will, I think, help to advance the agreement in the process. But consistent work, I think, is going to be very important.
Okay, tremendous. Well, we're beginning to get some questions in now, but we're also, I think, running out of time a bit. So I'm very keen to keep us on schedule. We'll have time. There's a last question about bottom-up approaches with an overarching body. That's quite a good question. Others want to type answers into that. I'd be happy for them to do that while we move on. But Katie, if you're happy with this as the administrator here, I think we probably ought to move on to the next speaker. You're happy with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
right.
Please, our participants, continue to enter questions as our speakers are presenting. And if we're unable to answer questions, we will save questions and try to reach out in the follow-up to the event to answer any that we run out of time to get to.
Okay, excellent. So our next speaker is Professor Lisa Levin. She's from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and she's going to talk about harnessing the elements of the BBNJ Agreement to increase climate resilience and support the critical carbon cycling services provided by the ocean. So Lisa, over to you.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Can you just tell me, are my slides showing up?
Yeah, that's good. And you're on display too.
Okay. So everybody, I'm at COP29. I've selected what I thought was a quiet place, but it's gotten increasingly noisy. So I apologize if you end up with background noise. But I've been tasked with talking about harnessing the elements of the BBNJ agreement to increase climate resilience and support carbon cycling services provided by the ocean. I'm going to introduce this with the Maori Taniwha, which is a guardian of the ocean, a mythical creature. So we know that there are many strong links between biodiversity and climate. We know that the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction is very vulnerable to climate change, warming, deoxygenation, acidification, and therefore efforts to protect biodiversity have to take into consideration the effects of changing climate, and that can be changing species distributions, changing habitat suitability, altered migration patterns. We know that biodiversity underpins the carbon cycle and carbon sequestration that controls our climate, and that thus protections have to incorporate and prioritize these functions. And we know that ocean-based mitigation efforts, which are a big topic here at COP, may not succeed if they in fact harm biodiversity. So we need solutions that are both biodiversity positive and climate positive. The Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative has produced a whole series of briefs during the text negotiations. The last one very specifically tried to introduce more climate language into the text. And now climate change appears in 6 places, 7 times in the actual negotiated BBNJ agreement text. It's in the preamble, referring to climate impacts on marine ecosystems. It's in the use of terms defining cumulative impacts, which include the consequences of climate change, ocean acidification and related impacts. Let's see. Oh no, my slides are not advancing. Here we go. It's in Article 7 under General Principles and Approaches. An approach that builds ecosystem resilience, including to adverse effects of climate change and ocean acidification, and also maintains and restores the ecosystem integrity, including the carbon cycling services that underpin the role of the ocean in climate. And this phrase, I think we're very happy is there, and it's gotten a lot of press here at COP. It's in Part 3, Article 17, under objectives to strengthen resilience to stressors, including those related to climate change and ocean acidification. It's in Annex 1, indicative criteria include vulnerability to climate change. And in Annex 2, under capacity building and transfer of marine tech, including technology that can help and knowledge that can help address the adverse effects of climate change and so on. So those are the places that climate's actually in the text. And I want to talk about how we can actually use that text to increase resilience and protect biodiversity, and also to protect the ocean carbon cycle, which is dependent on that biodiversity. So within area-based management tools, we can add climate criteria to protect areas that are critical for productivity and carbon transfer, storage, burial, and sequestration. We can protect areas from activities that we know might remove or release large amounts of carbon, things like bottom trawling and seabed mining. We can protect areas vulnerable to climate change, deoxygenation, and acidification. We have already heard about habitat corridors. We can protect corridors and climate refugia and protect top to bottom biodiversity. In other words, in multiple dimensions. In terms of Part 4, the environmental impact assessment elements, we can build climate impacts into strategic environmental assessment, estimate greenhouse gas footprints and act to reduce them. We can assess climate intervention, technology impacts and risks, incorporate monitoring to detect climate-induced change. We can evaluate synergistic effects of climate change stressors and allow adaptive management to help address changing climates. And then within marine genetic resources, most people don't think of this as being related to climate, but there, of course, are likely to be resources that hold solutions to climate change, microbes that can consume CO2, for example. And we can enable discovery and benefit sharing of these, best practices for access with regard to carbon footprint, and we can support adaptive and integrated use and conservation of genetic resources in the context of climate change. And then finally, the last part, we can empower global engagement and capacity to address biodiversity and climate together. That might include enabling capacity for assessing and reducing carbon footprints, or for evaluating marine carbon dioxide removal technologies. We can include climate change impact monitoring, early warning systems, and predictive modeling in our knowledge and tech transfer. We can include adopting ecosystem approaches that link biodiversity to sustainable fisheries management to improve climate resilience, can enable new observations and observational tools in remote and deep areas to record climate change and its impact, and knowledge transfer of biodiversity-enabled climate services. In other words, raise awareness about how important biodiversity is to climate and climate regulation. So my final slide, I really want to suggest we can enable a climate smart BBNJ agreement. And some of the actions could be to mandate from the COPs collaboration between UNFCCC, the CBD, and BBNJ to support integrated planning. We could enable a joint program of work between the COPs. We could organize co-sponsored workshops focused on BBNJ biodiversity climate action with all the different relevant partners. We could highlight emerging science and observing needs and governance issues in key economic sectors that are emerging in the high seas. I mentioned some of these already. We could introduce new elements for BBNJ that incorporate climate. And I'm not sure, I'm not a policy person per se, but maybe work programs, voluntary commitments, engaging NGOs and IGOs, and some of the formats here at COP with the Marrakesh Partnership and the ocean breakthroughs. And then finally, I think we need shared indicators and monitoring frameworks across the instruments, not separate for biodiversity and for climate, for example. And with that, I want to thank everybody, and I will stop sharing.
Lisa, thank you. Fantastic. And kept within the 5 minutes as well. So thank you very much indeed. We are getting a little bit of noise from the back, but nothing serious. So great. I mean, I think the important thing is this dynamic between the the way the Conference of Parties takes the initiatives which has been open to it, which are possibly open to it. You know, the provision in Article 5 that talks about not undermining the work of other organizations now includes a very positive obligation to collaborate and cooperate, as you point out to us. So that the possible dynamics of that, this is a great ideas of how that might work. So we'll have to look forward to see how that moves forward. Thank you very much. All right, we'll move forward then. So our next speaker is Andrew Hume from the GF, from the Global Environment Facility Secretariat. And he's going to talk about the GF's enabling support to countries for the ratification and capacity building to implement the BBNJ Agreement. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, David. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes, everything's good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and thank you to the Global Ocean Forum for the invitation to speak today. So hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Hume. I'm the International Waters Local Area Coordinator at the GEF Secretariat, and also lead on our BBNJ programming. And I'm excited to briefly speak today about our support to the BBNJ Agreement. Just briefly, if you're not familiar with the GEF, so the Global Environment Facility was established in 1992, and over the past 30 years has become the largest multilateral fund for the global environment. The GEF provides assistance to developing countries to meet objectives of international environmental conventions while delivering global environmental benefits. Most importantly, the GEF serves as part of the financial mechanism to several conventions that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, and of course, soon to include also the BBNJ Agreement once it enters into force. The GEF operates through a partnership that includes 185 member countries, 18 GEF agencies, whose logos you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, as well as civil society, local communities, and many other parts of a very large and robust GEF partnership. To give you an idea of the scope of the GEF, over the past 30 years, it's invested over $25 billion in financing, mobilizing an additional $145 billion in co-financing, with over 6,000 projects all over the world. While we most often talk about the GEF Trust Fund, in fact, the GEF consists of what we call a family of funds that includes most recently the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, as well as climate funds on adaptation and other specific funds underneath the UNCBD and the UNFCCC. The last thing I'll just say here about the GEF, and it's I think maybe the most important, is that the GEF was established under a principle of country ownership. Government support is essential to all the activities that the GEF performs, especially within a country. This includes everything from decisions made by countries at COP, at conventions of parties, decisions, and that takes it all the way down to an operational level where GEF funding passes through a country. It must be endorsed through a GEF operational focal point. This is a government official who's tasked with coordinating the national GEF portfolio to ensure broad engagement with a range of stakeholders. So now moving into the BBNJ Agreement, Article 52, as you may know, speaks to the financial mechanism. One of the questions I saw in the chat was, what is the main obstacle to the implementation of the BBNJ Agreement? As you can probably see already happening well, not already, but it's happening for many years in the COP, UNFCCC COP negotiations, and especially their COP29, money is one of the biggest barriers to the implementation of any of these. And so the financial mechanism is a crucial part to any agreement's implementation. So the BBNJ agreement and financial mechanism includes 3 parts, as you can see on the screen: the voluntary trust fund, a special fund, and then the Jeff Trust Fund. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through a whole large series of back and forth decisions that were taken ultimately by our Jeff Council and our amendment to our Jeff instrument to include the BBNJ agreement as part of the core convention or agreements that we support. So I'll jump right to a main BBNJ programming guidelines document that we have. The QR code on the screen will take you to a link that you can access that document. It's also available on the DWALOS website. But this is the main guidance document for both describing the use of Jeff funding as part of the financial mechanism at the current phase around ratification, support, implementation readiness. And this document was developed closely with DWALOS to ensure alignment with the agreement and the overall assistance that DWALOS is also providing. So I'll focus the rest of the discussion on this. But basically, the main thing to take away from my presentation and this document is that in the current Jeff 8 4-year cycle that will end in June of 2026, there is an allocation of $34 million for ratification, support, and implementation readiness of the BBNJ agreement for Jeff recipient countries. So I'll describe this again in more detail, but the guidelines document also discusses eligibility for accessing the support and then breaks down the types of support that will be provided. The 2 types of support, as you can see on the screen, include a national level support. This is $175,000 available to all Jeff recipient countries. And then a second type of support, which will be a single $5 million global and regional project. In a little bit more detail, I'll discuss this national level support. All Jeff recipient countries are available to request access to this funding. It's really overall designed to focus on 3 things, which you can see at the top of the screen. So that includes assessing current legal, policy, and institutional frameworks to help carry out the agreement, support for carrying out ratification, acceptance, or approval processes, and then readiness for implementation of the agreement. Ultimately, the funding will end up not only providing support to countries for facilitating the ratification process. One of the things that will also be required as part of the funding is developing a initial BBNJ assessment report. This is essentially a summary of the activities that the country undertook using the Jeff funding to move them farther towards their ratification journey. It's not meant to be onerous. As you can see on the bottom side of the screen, it gives you an idea of what the report will cover, but it's essentially an overview of the status at the end of the Jeff funding as to where the country sits in its journey towards implementation, ratification, or implementation readiness. The types of support that the Jeff will aim to provide at the national level, you can see them on the screen here. They are described in more detail in that guidelines document I referred to earlier with the QR code. But overall, again, they include stakeholder mapping, gap analysis, legislation drafting, awareness raising, implementation readiness, and really any other type of national level need necessary to help the countries move forward in that ratification or implementation readiness journey. Just quickly on the steps to access this, and again, this is a much longer discussion that I won't have time to cover now, but we've essentially identified 3 Jeff agencies that are supporting countries in accessing this funding. That is FAO, UNEP, or UNDP. So a country first would decide which of the 3 agencies they wish to work with. Second step would be for the operational focal point in that country to then complete a letter of endorsement. This is a Jeff template that they are quite familiar with, requesting the funding for their country. Then the agency will collect that letter of endorsement with other countries and submit that to the Jeff as part of a package of countries, what we call an umbrella enabling activity. This can happen on a rolling basis. There are no deadlines up until the end of Jeff 8, which ends in June of 2026. So the Jeff will be approving these on a rolling basis. We've already approved 2 of these umbrella enabling activity packages. We have about 30 countries that have already requested support for this. The support to the specific activities that the country will wish to undertake from that menu that I presented in the previous slide, those will actually be decided by the country and the Jeff agency during the subgranting or the national grant agreement stage. That allows us to have a common template for essentially a very quick approval process earlier throughout. And then lastly, upon completion of the activities, they're submitting that initial report. I mentioned earlier, there is also a $5 million, what we call a medium-sized project or a single global regional project. This is being implemented again by FAO, UNEP, and UNDP. In the interest of time, I won't cover it here, but you can see on the screen the types of activities that we'll focus on covering. This is also described in that guidelines document I mentioned earlier with the QR code. This is being drafted in consultation with Dwalas. And one of the main efforts is also trying to avoid duplication with other support activities, many of which have been discussed on this panel here already, including EU and others. Just the last slide, I want to note as I mentioned, we're ending our GEF 8 cycle in June of 2026, but we're actually beginning the replenishment or the negotiations for our next GEF 9 cycle, likely beginning next year in 2025. This is happening basically in parallel to the PrepCom process of the BBNJ PrepCom, and that provides an important opportunity to ensure that the drafting of the strategy for the GEF 9 for the GEF Trust Fund includes guidance from the BBNJ PrepCom, but also ensures that the GEF Trust Fund during the replenishment of the fund itself in GEF 9 is robust enough to ensure that we have sufficient funding for a strong implementation of the agreement. So we look forward to working with any interested parties and helping to ensure that we have that sufficient funding there to have a robust amount of funding available at that COP1 for strong implementation. And with that, I'll stop and thank you, David.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. And the home team now are talking about 2 projects which are actually child projects under the Common Oceans Programme. So that's great. So, okay, so I'm going to move on fairly quickly because we're not running out of time, but I want to leave some time for questions. So Miriam, you're next on, I think. So our next speaker is Miriam Balgos from the Global Ocean Forum, and she's going to talk about building capacity for cross-sectoral ABNJ management. Over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I am happy to share an initiative that started in 2023 through the cross-sectoral project. This project is working in 2 pilot regions, the Southeast Pacific and the Pacific Islands, in developing capacity for adapting existing and developing new mechanisms for cross-sectoral management in ABNJ in the Southeast Pacific and Pacific Islands, which is relevant even at the pre-ratification and ratification stage of a country's BBNJ agreement process. This is a UNEP project being carried out by the Global Ocean Forum in partnership with UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center, Grid Arundel, Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, and the University of the South Pacific in the Pacific Islands, and the Comisión Permanente del Pacífico Sur and the Universidad Católica del Norte in the Southeast Pacific with the support of the Global Environment Facility. Next slide, please. This figure outlines some of the existing frameworks and institutions responsible for the management of sectoral activities occurring in ABNJ. It is clear from this figure that ABNJ, itself a part of the Earth's vast ocean system, involves a complex system of governance with wide-ranging objectives and information flows across ocean regions. Relevant international organizations and their national focal points, i.e. the actors, currently have limited resources, capabilities, and incentives to cooperate and coordinate their activities in ABNJ with each other. Coordination is also lacking between activities in ABNJ and in national EEZs. Data and information on different ABNJ governance, ecosystems, uses, pressures, and impacts is inconsistent and widely dispersed, which affects access and means that some actors are not necessarily aware of the activities of another, that cumulative impacts are not effectively addressed. This situation is expected to start changing eventually once the BBNJ agreement comes into force. Next slide, please. In response to this baseline situation, the cross-sectoral project aims to strengthen capacity for sectoral and cross-sectoral cooperation and coordination through a training program for officials from regional and national organizations and working with partners in our 2 pilot regions to improve understanding of ABNJ issues and governance. The project also aims to improve knowledge about ABNJ issues and governance among stakeholders in the pilot regions, including benefits that could be derived from effective management and governance, and disseminating the knowledge generated by the activities of the cross-sectoral project and other child projects of the Common Oceans Program. Next slide, please. When developing capacity for cross-sectoral ABNJ management, thinking in systems is a clear requirement. The structure of a system is its interlocking stock, flow, and feedback loop. Its function or purpose is often the most crucial determinant of the system's behavior. An example from the IPCC is shown on this slide. At the systems level, each activity, whether adverse or beneficial, is envisioned to contribute to the reinforcement of negative or positive interactions among the climate system, the biodiversity system, and the human system. While the focus on ABNJ has increased with the adoption of the BBNJ Agreement, it is clear that there are varying levels of knowledge and information available for those involved in ABNJ management. It is important to acknowledge this fact so that knowledge gaps can be addressed in a timely manner. The flow of information can help to identify and highlight the interconnections of systems, as interconnections can develop naturally at points of information distribution. Next slide, please. The open and honest exchange of information among actors involved in ABNJ management at both regional and national levels will be critical to build capacity and implement the agreement. It is important to ensure actors and stakeholders are involved in the discussions. The cross-sectoral project aims to assist countries in its 2 pilot regions in improving understanding of ABNJ issues and governance. The project is currently working on the development of an ABNJ governance platform that will provide a central repository for knowledge related to ABNJ. Key communities targeted in knowledge dissemination of the project include the international waters and BBNJ communities, as well as the media and general public. Next slide, please. Project partners aim to develop a cross-sectoral framework for ABNJ governance. This exercise can provide a forecast of capacity requirements, an inventory and forecast of resources available to meet the requirements, and a preliminary plan for how the difference between required and available resources can be bridged. Furthermore, the framework will serve both as a guidepost in the design and conduct of the capacity building program, and as a resource to support professionals working in the context of ABNJ governance more widely. An overlay analysis will be used to preserve all useful and effective features and attributes of related management and governance concepts applicable to ABNJ, including the relevant principles on which these are based, as provided by existing international instruments and frameworks and global, regional, sub-regional, and sectoral bodies. This exercise aims to identify the features that are desirable to include in a cross-sectoral ABNJ management framework. Next slide, please. The overlay analysis is part of the process of developing a conceptual framework for cross-sectoral ABNJ management for the 2 pilot regions. It must be jointly developed by national and regional actors in the regions and will likely feed into a global framework through the implementation of the BBNJ Agreement. This framework will be critical as countries move forward with ratification and implementation activities. To deepen the integration analysis, it is crucial for the unique socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental contexts of the pilot regions and the countries therein to ensure the effectiveness of the framework for cross-sectoral ABNJ management in the regions. For example, the Pacific Islands are diverse, each with distinct cultural traditions, environmental conditions, and development needs. Gender considerations should also be taken into account. A more nuanced cross-sectoral management approach reflecting this diversity is essential. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Miriam. I was just pointing to the clock. You did well, thank you. And just let's confirm that all these slides are actually going to be available, certainly the recording, and we hope the slides will be available as well. So I'm introducing myself next because I'm going to talk about the second of the 2 projects, which is already being funded by the Global Environment Facility, under the Common Oceans Programme, and these aren't they aren't technically BBNJ agreements because BBNJ grants, because BBNJ grants will need to follow the guidance of the COP once the treaty comes into force. But these are quite interesting demonstration projects. Which, so thanks, Miriam, for that introduction. I'm going to talk about the second of those, or the other of the child projects, which is relevant for this, which is the Sargasso Sea Commission. And I'm going to talk about, I've actually changed the title slightly because we've amended the document which we're preparing to, we're calling it the Socio-Ecosystem Diagnostic Analysis and a Strategic Action Plan in ABNJ. Let's just look at this. So first, when we're talking about the Sargasso Sea, the first question is, where is it? It's in the Northwest Atlantic gyre around the islands of Bermuda. And it's interesting both from a biological, ecological point of view, but also from a legal point of view, because it's an ABNJ area. This area here, this is the large ellipse, which the 10 governments have actually signed a political declaration on collaboration for the conservation of this area. So it excludes the EZs of the countries, including the BZ of Bermuda. This is the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization, which is a regional fisheries organization. And of course, the other two global organizations which have competence there include the IMO, for vessel movements and pollution issues, and the Seabed Authority. And there's some seamounts, and particularly in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to the east, which are important. And then ICAT, which is the tuna organization for the whole Atlantic. So there's no regional environmental organization for this, and as yet there's no fisheries organization, general fisheries organization for this area either. So it's interesting for that. It's important for a number of reasons, and I won't go into this in more detail, but cetaceans, a large number of commercial species like swordfish, marlin, and tunas, as well as a number of endangered species. It's also the only place in the world, the only place in the Atlantic where the Atlantic species of anguillid eels, and the European and the American eels, spawn just off the 300 miles south of Bermuda. We don't know why. They migrate thousands of miles to this area south of Bermuda, spawn and die, and then the leptocephali, little guys, find their way back to the rivers and the brackish waters of Europe and North America. So it's also got a lot of endemic species which are adapted to live in the Sargassum. So this project's been running for about 10 years. The grant is a little bit earlier than Miriam's got. I was going in 2022, so we're coming to the end of our second year of this. We have 10 governments, including the Azores, Bahamas, Bermuda, BVI, Canada, Cayman Islands, Dominican Republic, Monaco as well, and the UK and the US, and France and Sweden are also providing a lot of financial support. We have an expert commission. We've been working a long time. We have a lot of arrangements with this, collaboration arrangements with existing organizations, and you can see the complexity of this when we talked about collaboration and cooperation agreements with other existing frameworks, which this COP will have to be looking at. These are the number of bodies that we have that we're working currently with, and we've also got a lot of partners, both from science, in the science community, and also from civil society. So this agreement, this grant that we have from the GF is called Strengthening the Stewardship of an Economically and Biologically Significant High Seas Area. And it's supplemented by co-financing from the French Environment Fund, which is looking at the contribution to hybrid governance in protecting remarkable areas in the high seas, both in the Eastern Tropics, Pacific Eastern Tropics, and that's the Thermal Dome, and Northwest Atlantic. And that's a slew of logos. So the top line are the GF implementing agencies, implementing partners. That's UNDP and IOC, all under the FAO, Common Oceans Programme, and then the other partners from the French project. So the two main things that we're doing, short time, we're conducting a traditional GF large marine ecosystem projects would do a transboundary diagnostic analysis. Well, we haven't got any boundaries here because it's all ABNJ, so we're calling this a socio-ecosystem diagnostic. It provides the baseline. This is a big project. It's a lot of work. This is nearly 2 years in. And then also they will then develop a strategic action program for the management and stewardship measures going forward for this conservation of this big area. This is the link to BBNJ. So the BBNJ requirements, if you're going to make a proposal for ABMTs, for example, under Article 19, you need to have you need to have a stakeholder engagement with a very wide range of partners and potential stakeholders. And so that's been one of the things that we've been working on which also the GF requires in any event, but this is, I think, a good practice practice that we've been able to take advantage of. We also the proposal has to be based upon the best available science, and that's what our CEDA will be, we hope. And then also you have to make proposals for measures, for conservation measures and monitoring. And we're talking about an area, well, this is 2 million square miles in the high seas, 200 miles by definition, 200 miles away from any land. So this monitoring is really quite an issue for us to engage with. So this is where we are with our collaboration. We've actually hired a private sector company to actually to actually do our stakeholder involvement. We've had 3 meetings so far. We're going to have another one in December with the shipping communities, and then we have one planned with fishing communities in next year. And then the diagnostic analysis has involved a lot of partners as well: Bermuda Institute for Ocean Science, Duke University, Imperial College London, Edinburgh University, a lot of individual experts. And the interesting issue is that this is an expensive process. This is like a baseline requirement for a proposal. We think it's cost us $2.5 million. Just to go back to that last slide, it's about $250,000 that we were expecting to spend on the stakeholder meeting. So this is quite a high bar that the treaty establishes for us. So I'm short of time. Slides will be available. Thank you very much for your attention. I have to end sharing, don't I? Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we haven't got we've got about 10 minutes. So Casey, if you'd help me with dealing with this. Let's have a look at some of the questions we've got coming in. Go on.
Our first question we have from Cecilia Engler, which is, what has been the reception or influence of the ITLOS, or International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, advisory opinion during COP29?
Okay, well, I'm not there, so would anybody like to have I suspect this might be early on for us because it came out in May. It's beginning to become more widely known, and of course there's also going to be a major advisory opinion from the ICJ, which is going to be probably at the end of next year, either the end of next year or the beginning of the following year, which will be looking at a much wider spread of issues, where the ITLOS opinion will be it's not binding on it, but it'll be extremely persuasive because it's a unanimous decision of the body that was established by the Law of the Sea Convention. Has there been any discussion would any of our panelists like to attempt that one? Has there been any discussion? Lisa, you're putting your screen on.
I've heard it mentioned in some side events, but only once or twice. It definitely, from the things I've been in on ocean, it hasn't been had a high profile, which is strange, but it hasn't.
Okay, excellent. I mean, the full significance of it, they do actually say in the obligation not to pollute the marine environment, which is in Article 1 of the definition of pollution is in Article 1 of the Law of the Sea Convention, actually is more extensive than the obligations under the Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that this is an overarching obligation. So it's a very important judgment. But so thanks for the question. I think we're going to move on now.
Let me just say, it came up in the context of marine carbon dioxide removal, adding carbon dioxide to the ocean, right?
So yes, there's obligations not to change one form of pollution to another, right? So thank you. Yes, that's that's interesting to bear in mind. Casey, please, over to you again. So thanks for the question, Cecilia.
Our next question is from Luisa Dassau. What is the likelihood or ongoing discussion around the deployment of an additional mechanism to enhance the ABMT decision-making through Article 22.4 of the BBNJ? Is there work being done around what this might look like at this stage?
Okay, that's a fairly technical question. I mean, I don't know whether there's been any discussion of that. Valentina, have you been following? I don't want to put anybody on the spot with this. I don't think I can answer it because I don't know what's been going on over the last in detail. Is it? Can you help us with this one or?
Well, nothing in that level of detail as you're saying.
Yes, yeah.
David. These are the kind of issues that will be discussed eventually once the first COP and the following COPs will start their work, and as I said, following the entry into force of the agreement. So formally in the formal discussions, nothing to that level of technicality.
Yeah, correct. Okay, thank you. So an interesting point, and this comes back to these wider questions, which is that until we've seen the kind of fleshing out of the framework, because so many issues were deferred. I was actually on a panel with the President Rena Lee last month, and I talked about these issues being kicked down the road, and she didn't like that at all. She said, "No, they're not. It wasn't because we wanted them to be considered in more detail later." So I think that she's right. So I haven't used that phrase anymore. Yeah, it's certainly intended that this will have to be fleshed out, and even after the sort of basic parameters have been agreed, we'll have to see the role the COP takes. I mean, they could be very proactive. And there's obviously, of course, an issue of the fact that the countries that will be member states of the COP will also be members of the other organizations, right? Many of them. So there's going to be, one hopes, an atmosphere of collaboration there with us. So, but that's okay. So thanks for the question. I think we'll have to defer that one. Casey, can you help us with the next one, please?
Sure. This next one, I believe, is for Andrew from Come Adelcapocoli. Apologies for my pronunciation of your last name. Concerning the eligibility criteria for accessing GEF support, what are the specific meaningful steps a country should show in ratifying the BBNJ agreement?
Yes, thank you, Come, and this is maybe to give some context. So I mentioned in my presentation that there is every GEF recipient country is eligible to request up to $175,000 US. And we do describe the eligibility criteria in that document. I believe Come has probably opened the document to read it in detail, and that's great. And so the first simple criteria would be that a country is already a signatory to the agreement. If that is the case, then no additional steps are needed. It shows that there's already clearly an interest in trying to ratify the agreement. So that would be the first thing. If a country is not a signatory to the agreement, that is okay, but then they do need to show through a letter that is attached and presented to the GEF as part of the proposal with the letter of endorsement. This secondary letter would be a description from a high-level person within government that can speak on behalf of the government, the steps that have been taken within the government to begin the ratification process. That could include a wide range of things, from awareness raising to having committee discussions within government or outside of government. There is no prescribed set of examples, and I don't want to give too many because that might give the idea that there is this set. We are open to any interpretation. It is really a good faith effort from the government to say, yes, this is a meaningful effort that we would like to take, and we would like the GEF support or the GEF funding support to facilitate that process further. I will end saying that every GEF operational focal point has received a memo from the GEF earlier this year when this funding became available. I believe the memo was sent in April. And in that letter, we provided an example of a letter that could give from the government showing what this kind of meaningful steps could look like. This process actually follows a process that we provided similar for a convention that we provide support on for the Minamata Convention on Mercury, where we went through the ratification process with GEF funding. And so this is mirroring that process. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, I'm happy to discuss bilaterally. So please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Andrew. And obviously these, this is being recorded, and Katie and Miriam confirmed that your slides will be available, so people will be able to see particularly read the QR code that you actually put up there. So tremendous. Well, thank you for that. I think I probably better wrap up. We probably should be stopping on time because we've got people in lots of time zones. So let me thank everybody. Let me thank all the participants. We've had tremendous, really lovely, diverse presentations. We've heard from countries. We've had two of the leading countries in Monaco is the first, amongst the first to actually ratify, but also from Costa Rica, which has been a champion for the oceans for a long time, and we're delighted to have them involved. And then the European Union, which is going to be a major player with not only in terms of the numbers of countries which are involved, but also with the support that they provided. Well, we've heard from civil society again. Gina, thank you for that. I think that was really interesting. And Lisa, who's a leading authority on deep sea biodiversity and a tireless warrior on this issue. So delighted to have you involved with that and to hear your thoughts about that. I think you're absolutely right about the linkages between both the Framework Convention regime and the BBNJ Agreement. We also heard from Valentina on the challenges that the Doulos is facing with that. And then, of course, with Andrew giving us a tremendous summary of the support, $34 million in the first instance, of course, which the GF is going to be providing. There'll be other sources of funding as well. And then Miriam, thank you for that with her capacity building project. These are the two existing GF projects. So, and then mine, which is actually trying to pilot. It's not technically a pilot. We're trying to lead some of the develop best practices in this area if we move forward when the agreement comes into force. So again, thanks to those who put questions in. I think we've got the questions there, but we'll hope to be able to answer those even which we weren't able to address in plenary. But I do think we ought to keep on time. So thank you all very much. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to Miriam and Katie for organizing this, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.